Mark chapter 1. Years ago, before modern technology came along, trains and their engineers would have to rely on the engineer's voice. They would have to rely on signs or signals. They relied on whistles because they did not have the technology that trains have today. There was an occasion where a locomotive was pulling out of the train station and there were workers there in the way. And a bystander yelled out, "Stop!" But the train didn't stop. An engineer supervisor came running on the scene and he yelled out, "Stop!" and the train stopped. It's the power of the person in authority. In Mark chapter 1, we have an occasion, an event in the life of Jesus that shows his power to command, his authority. We've got a man who is possessed by an evil spirit. He's possessed by one of the demons of Satan, one of the angels of Satan. And Jesus has the authority in and of himself to cast the spirit out, to control Satan's messengers. So, as we take certain parts of the life of Christ and we focus on certain events from the life of Christ, this afternoon I want us to look at this event from his life. Mark chapter 1. Mark begins his gospel back in chapter 1 and verse 1, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I have a friend, he actually teaches at Freed Hardeman, who starts his Bible studies with this verse. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because the word gospel means good news. If there's good news, then that also means there's bad news. The bad news is sin, and that's where he talks about sin and what sin does for us or against us and keeps us out of God's presence, which of course leads into a discussion of Jesus and how the gospel is good news. This event that we're going to look at this afternoon, verses 21 through 27, is one of the first public events in the ministry of Jesus. And what Mark is doing as he goes through his gospel account, and this comes as no surprise to us, he's answering the question, who is Jesus? Who is this Jesus of Nazareth? Who is this Jesus that Christians claim rose from the dead? Who is he? So we look at this text. Verse 21, Jesus and his entourage came to Capernaum. And immediately they went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and Jesus began to teach. Can you see Capernaum on the map? Jerusalem is down there in the south. You follow the Jordan River up to the Sea of Galilee. And in the northwest corner, to your left of the Sea of Galilee, is Capernaum, on the banks of the Sea of Galilee. Matthew and Mark and Luke focus on Jesus' ministry in and around the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum and that area, the Decapolis, all of that area up in there. John focuses on Jesus' ministry in Judea, in the area around Jerusalem. So Jesus came to the synagogue. There was a synagogue in every city where there were at least 10 Jewish men. So that when you get to Acts chapter 16, for example, and Lydia and the women are out by the river Ganges having worship, because of that situation, the suggestion is made that there were not 10 Jewish men in Philippi. And that's why the women were out by the riverside having worship. Maybe. Synagogues were created during that Babylonian exile that we keep talking about in Wednesday night in our Daniel class. Scholars don't know exactly when and where and how the synagogue got started. Originally, they were community centers, the heart of a community. So that's where the men came and played chess, and the women came to talk about the old men. But part of what they did on the Sabbath day was then to use it as a place to come together and study the law, the prophets, the Old Testament, as we would call it. They would pray. They did not do much singing in the synagogue. They would sing the Psalms from time to time, but it was apparently not an important part of their worship service. Mainly it was studying the law, the Old Testament, and prayer. I just got finished reading a 650-page book on the synagogue. It was supposed to be a definitive study of everything scholars have learned up to the point of its publication. 650 pages. Most of it was not helpful. So don't get the book, in case you were thinking about it. So Jesus comes to the synagogue because that's his pattern, right? On the Sabbath, you go to the synagogue to hear the law taught and read. And so Jesus goes there to worship with his people. And because it's the Sabbath day, and because it was the practice to invite a rabbi to give a word of encouragement, then they invite Jesus to give a word of encouragement. And so Jesus stands up and he begins to teach. So we have here pictured the ordinary religious life of the Jews, and we have Jesus participating in that. But when Jesus teaches, it's something extraordinary. Again, Mark's purpose in writing his gospel is to answer that question: who is Jesus? Who is this man who claimed to be the Son of Man? Which again reflects back in Daniel chapter 7, which our Wednesday night class will get to in about 3 weeks. So Jesus is teaching the people. And who is he? Is he a teacher? Is he a prophet? Is he more than that? He claimed to be the Son of Man, which the Jews came to associate with the concept of the Messiah. Is he the Christ? Is he a miracle worker? Who is Jesus? You'll notice in verse 22 that once Jesus started teaching, the people were amazed. The people were amazed because he spoke as one having authority and not as the scribes. The scribes always quoted other scribes. They quoted scribes that were well known, well respected. There are 3 primary scribes from this period of Jewish history, the New Testament period of Jewish history. You had Shammai, you had Hillel, and of course you had Gamaliel. Saul of Tarsus studied under Gamaliel, you remember. So they always quoted somebody else. But Jesus doesn't quote anybody else. Jesus spoke with inherent authority because, as you and I know, Jesus was the one who was behind the Old Testament. He wrote the Old Testament, so to speak, so he knew exactly how to explain the Old Testament. I would be perfectly fine if throughout all of eternity we sat down at Jesus' feet and he said, okay, here's what I meant by this. Go from Genesis 1:1 to Revelation 22:21. Just sit and let Jesus explain to us what he meant. He's the one that wrote it. So Jesus could speak with authority. He spoke as the Son of God. He spoke with that kind of authority. And the people recognized that in him. The people were amazed because he didn't speak like their other teachers did, like their rabbis did. He spoke with authority. And incidentally, the Greek word translated authority could also be translated as power. So Jesus spoke with power. What does it mean that he spoke with authority or power? Jesus spoke with a broad range of knowledge. Some of the speakers that I like to listen to at Polishing the Pulpit, the ones I like to listen to most, actually make me feel the most ignorant because they have such a broad range of knowledge. That's how Jesus spoke. He speaks with a broad range of knowledge, and he speaks with great depth of knowledge. Jesus taught with confidence. He didn't ever have to say, I think that's what it meant. He didn't speak with hesitation. He spoke with confidence. And of course, he spoke with authority. Do you remember having a teacher in the classroom who spoke with that kind of authority? I see Jewel and Jacob with the kids, especially Theodore. Laurel is not old enough to walk away from mom and dad yet, but Theodore is. And dad will speak with authority. And there's been times where it's intimidated Theodore. Jesus speaks with authority. And they are amazed at that. And so his words carry that divine authority. But now here in this particular situation, in Capernaum, we've got something developing here, right? In verse 23. Just then there was a man in the synagogue who had an unclean spirit. And he cried out. And we'll look at verse 24 in just a moment. But now we've got a visible representation of the spiritual battle that has been going on since the Garden of Eden. The battle for the hearts and minds of human beings. The battle between God and Satan. God and Satan. Now, up to that point, the synagogue was quiet. It was peaceful. People were listening to Jesus. At this time, we don't know what text he was reading. Maybe he was reading from the scroll of Isaiah like he did in Nazareth in Luke chapter 4. But then all of a sudden, this man shows up, and he's got this unclean, evil spirit demon dwelling in him. And this spiritual battle is going to be made visible. The people around couldn't necessarily see what was going on, but of course Jesus could. Jesus could see into the spiritual realm. That's how Jesus knew what was going on in the minds of people in his audience. You see, I can't see into your mind. I can't see into your spirit, but Jesus could. And so Jesus could see this battle going on in this man's life, and this unclean spirit was taking over this man's mind and his heart. And he cried out, and notice what he says in verse 24. Listen to what this demon confesses. First of all, he says, what business do we have with each other, Jesus of Nazareth? I know who you are. Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are. The Holy One of God. Notice this unclean spirit knew Jesus' identity. His identity had been made public, so to speak. Now, God had kept Satan ignorant of his plans all the way up to the coming of Jesus, right? The Apostle Paul tells us that in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. But when the angel told Mary, that child that is born in you is conceived of the Holy Spirit, then that wicked demon in the corners of hell now knows that Jesus is God in the flesh. See, God had not made that public yet, but now it is. Now Satan knows who to attack. And so the demons know Jesus' identity. And not only do they know his identity, but they confess his identity. You are the Holy One of God. You recall James says in James chapter 2 that the demons believe and tremble. Have you come to destroy us? If you're taking notes, write down 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4 and Jude verse 6. Those two verses show us that God has bound demons in pits of darkness reserved for the coming day of judgment. These demons know that the destruction of their happiness is coming. And that destruction rests in the hands of Jesus, the Holy One of God. Now, the people around, they're wondering who Jesus is. They're asking themselves, even in this text, they ask themselves, who is this man? The demons are not asking that question. They know. The question for us, those who read the text, the question for us is, are we willing to confess the identity of Jesus and then obey the Holy One of God? That's the question that rests on us. So we've got this demon who is confessing that Jesus is the Holy One of God, and then we see the power of Jesus versus the power of Satan. Notice verse 25. Rebuking him, Jesus commanded him, be quiet and come out. Throwing that man into convulsions, the evil spirit, the unclean spirit, cried out in a loud voice and came out. Notice that Jesus did not do any kind of ritual. He did not use any amulets. He did not use any talismans. He did not use any objects. He did not call on anybody. He cast that evil spirit out by his own power, his own authority. That's the kind of authority with which Jesus taught. So Jesus rebuked him, and you remember that on occasions, Jesus told the unclean spirits, don't confess me. Jesus did not want false teachers confessing allegiance to him. If you're not going to teach the truth, don't associate yourself with me. Jesus said, be quiet. That Greek verb to be quiet outside of the Bible is used with the meaning to muzzle. So Jesus told that unclean spirit, be muzzled. There's a Romanian expression that they use sometimes with each other. It's very colloquial. You use it with people that you're familiar with, like your kids. And literally it means shut your trap. In essence, that's what Jesus is telling this demon. Shut your trap. Be quiet and come out. Now, there's no struggle going on between Jesus and this demon. The struggle is between the demon and the man's spirit that he's trying to control. That's when, verse 26, he throws him into convulsions. I've never seen somebody have convulsions. Have you? I could imagine it would be pretty scary. I've got a nephew who, at least at some times, has dealt with epilepsy. This man is thrown into convulsions. But there's no struggle between Jesus and the spirit. Jesus has all authority. Now this unclean spirit, just to show you how wicked Satan is, he does that right there at the very end. He throws him into convulsions before he cries out and then comes out of him, almost as one last-ditch effort to cause that man pain, and then he leaves. No wonder God has hell prepared for the devil and his angels, because that's how wicked they are, kicking a man when he's down. Verse 27, the crowd reacts again. All are amazed, so that they began to debate among themselves What is this? A teaching with authority. For even the unclean spirits obey him. The King has arrived. The King of the universe has set foot on earth. Back in verse 15, a part of the message of John the Baptizer as well as Jesus is the time is fulfilled and the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. One of the reasons why God allowed demons to leave the unseen world and dwell in people is so that Jesus could kick them out as a visible sign that he is the Son of God and that the kingdom has arrived. That's Mark chapter 3 and Matthew chapter 12. We don't get into that theological purpose of demon possession in this particular example. But in those other two passages I've just read, the authors let us know that's one of the reasons why God allowed demon possessions. To show man that Jesus is stronger than Satan and that the kingdom has come. So the King has arrived, and he speaks with power, and he speaks with authority. Do any of y'all get Amber Alerts on your phone? Yeah, some of you do. What do you do when you get that Amber Alert? You look at it. It arrests your attention, doesn't it? It's that power, that authority that comes with that particular message. Jesus speaks with power. Jesus speaks with authority. We have different responses among the people that listened to Jesus and saw his miracles. Some of them just reject Jesus. The Pharisees, the prime example. They just reject Jesus. He's not the Messiah they were expecting, and so they're not going to listen to him. Some people, they debate. We see that all through the life of Jesus. Is the Jews would debate with each other. The man who was born blind, you remember. How could this man give sight to the blind if he is a follower of Satan? That doesn't make sense. So they debated, who is this man? And then, of course, there were those, and the apostles are the prime example of this, but they certainly were not alone, the ones who submitted to Jesus. The ones who recognized Jesus as the Son of God, the Son of Man who came to establish that kingdom that we're studying from the book of Daniel. Now, there's a lot of voices out there. I was speaking with a young man this morning who came to worship. Incidentally, I've got a Bible study with him. He's not a Christian, so pray for that Bible study. We might save 2 souls through that process. But I was talking to him this morning, and we were talking about AI, how popular AI is, and how, in fact, it's designed to tell you what you want to hear. And what really opened my eyes to that point is when AI told me, I don't remember the question I asked, but we were having a Bible discussion with the AI. And AI says, I'll pray for you. This computer is telling me that it's going to pray for me. Now that illustrates that AI is designed to tell you what you want to hear. So the problem is people are going to AI and asking it religious questions, and it's just going to tell you what you want to hear. It's not necessarily after telling you truth. So our culture is speaking, and we hear different voices, and it may not be AI, it may be on TV, it may be politicians, it may be somebody that we work with. Everybody's got an opinion, right? Everybody's got an opinion. If you ask 10 people, random people, what you have to do to be right with God, you're going to get 10 different answers. Voices out there, desiring to speak, wanting our allegiance. And Jesus speaks. And He wants our allegiance. He's the only one who speaks with authority. He has authority over truth. He is the one who defines truth. He has authority over Satan. He has authority over our lives, whether we recognize it or not. He has authority over diseases. He has authority over death. And Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil, so that we who have been subject to fear of death all of our lives will not have to fear death. So what do we learn from this event of the life of Jesus? We've got to listen to Him. Listen to the voice of Jesus and surrender not just part of our lives to Jesus. Surrender all of our lives to Jesus. How we think, how we talk, how we act, how we worship, every aspect of our lives. Because Jesus is King. He has authority over Satan. And His Word is what brings us life. And that Word will take us to victory over death. So if you're here tonight and you're not ready to stand before God in judgment, let's do something about it. Let's open up God's Word and let's listen to what Jesus has to say. Nothing else. We don't have to listen to anything else. I've got hundreds of books, maybe 1,000 books in my library. Commentaries on the Bible. None of them compare to what this book has to say. In fact, to be honest with you, a lot of times I find this book a whole lot easier to understand than the commentaries. Man doesn't speak with authority. Jesus does. Let's submit. If we can help you, let us know. Let's stand and sing together.